Montana, the Supreme Court, and Ellis Island are all on this day. Welcome back to On This Day. Today's date is May 26th. It is the 146th day of the year. There are 219 days left in 2025. It is the 21st Monday in the 22nd week, and it's the 68th day of spring. You got 25 days left until summer. It is Memorial Day. Yes, here in the United States, we have Memorial Day. We have Memorial Day to honor and remember the men and women who have died while serving in the U.S. military. It's a day of reflection and gratitude for the sacrifices made by those who have served and died in the defense of this country. My family has a long history of serving in the military. Army and Navy for the most part. There's been a few Air Force and I think one Marine. And I'm talking all the way back to my great-grandfather's day. We had a family friend passed away, maybe 10 years ago, named Gino. Gino was an interesting character. During the Korean War, he used his oldest brother's ID. Back then they didn't have computers, and he went and signed up for the Army. Big Italian guy, they didn't question anything. He didn't look young. He was 15 years old and in combat. Needless to say, kind of messed him up his whole life. All right, let's see what else May 26 has given us. 1293, yes, we're going that far back. An earthquake strikes Kamakura, Japan, killing 23,000 people. I question things like that because that was almost 1,000 years ago. Were they really keeping records back then? I think they'd be too busy worrying about ninjas showing up at their hut to really be marking down who died in an earthquake. But who knows? 1783, a great Jubilee Day held in North Stamford, Connecticut, celebrates the end of fighting in the American Revolutionary War. 1864, Montana is organized as a United States territory. 1865, conclusion of the American Civil War. The Confederate General Edmund Kirby Smith, commander of the Trans-Mississippi Division, is the last full general of the Confederate Army to surrender, and he does it in Galveston, Texas. 1923, the first 24-hour of Le Mans is held in France. Run annually in June thereafter, it becomes the oldest endurance racing event in the world. I've always been fascinated by this. I think it was a Steve McQueen movie when I was a kid, Saturday afternoon movie or something like that. I became fascinated with it at a young age. I'm not a big car or race fan. 1927, the last Ford Model T rolls off the assembly line after a production run of 15 million vehicles. That's insane, 15 million of the same vehicle. The Ford Model T is an automobile that was produced by the Ford Motor Company from October 1st, 1908 to May 26th, 1927. Almost 20 years. And they made 15 million. Now, another mass-produced vehicle is the Volkswagen Beetle. They were produced from 1945 to 2003. They made 23 million Beetles, sold globally, not just in the United States. Now, after the original Beetle stopped production, they came up with another one in 2003 called the New Beetle. I think they made those for a couple of years. They're kind of cool. Everyone ranted and raved because they had a little flower vase in the dash. 1938, in the United States, the House of Un-American Activity Committee begins its first session. For short, it was called HUAC, and that's what we're going to continue to call it because that's a long name. But 1938, this was the moment that paranoia and politics officially got hitched in Washington. On May 26, 1938, Congress launched the HUAC, and its very first session marked the beginning of one of the most controversial chapters in 20th century American political history. Originally, HUAC was formed to sniff out Nazi sympathizers and fascist threats within the US, which sort of makes sense given the rise of Hitler in Europe. But it didn't take long before the committee shifted its focus to rooting out communist and un-American activities, whatever that meant at the time. Spoiler alert, it meant anything that didn't sit right with certain politicians. Over the years, HUAC became a tool for political showmanship, fear-mongering, and public shaming, especially during the Cold War. Its most famous period came in the late 40s and early 50s when it began targeting Hollywood, accusing screenwriters, actors, and directors of spreading communist propaganda through movies. That gave us the Hollywood 10, a group of filmmakers who refused to testify before the committee and ended up blacklisted from the industry. Careers were ruined, friendships were shattered, and the entire entertainment world was plunged into an era of self-censorship. Everyone remembers Senator Joseph McCarthy, right? McCarthyism? Yeah, he got a little attention for this, started getting popular, and then just took it way too far. HUAC's legacy is a complicated one. It did uncover some real espionage cases. It also fueled mass hysteria and trampled civil liberties in the name of protecting democracy. In other words, the committee that claimed to defend American values sometimes forgot what those values actually were. By the time HUAC was dissolved in 1975, it had become a cautionary tale about what happens when government paranoia and unchecked power mix. But back in 1938, it was just getting started, and nobody realized yet just how big a shadow was about to be cast on American life. 1948, Congress passes the Public Law 8557, which permanently establishes the Civil Air Patrol as an auxiliary of the United States Air Force. 1998, the Supreme Court settles an island turf war. In a 6-3 decision, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in New Jersey versus New York that a majority of Ellis Island, yes, Ellis Island, the one everyone associates with New York and the Statue of Liberty, is actually part of New Jersey. This wasn't just a random history trivia fact either. This decision had decades of pent-up state rivalry, money, and pride behind it. So what happened? Well, the original natural island, just a little over 3-acre spit of land, was part of New York. But over the years, especially in the late 19th century and early 20th century, the federal government decided to expand Ellis Island with landfills, because nothing says welcome to America like artificial dirt. By 1934, the island was 27.5 acres, and 24.2 of those were man-made. And that's when New Jersey said, hey, that landfill is actually in our water. While New York said, but the island's name is Ellis Island, not Ellis, Jersey. Yeah, that was a lame joke. Sorry, never mind. Moving on. Eventually, the gloves came off and both sides ended up in front of the Supreme Court. The court sided with New Jersey, ruling that under an 1834 interstate compact between the two states, any addition to the island past the original footprint belongs to New Jersey. So today, if you ever visit Ellis Island and wonder which state you're in, it's complicated. You walk into the museum in New York, but go grab a coffee at the cafe, and technically, you're in New Jersey. Welcome to America, where even the land can't decide where it belongs. 2020, protests triggered by the murder of George Floyd erupt in Minneapolis, St. Paul, later becoming widespread across the United States and around the world. If you guys don't know, I'm in Portland, Oregon, and we went overboard with it. We protested that for months. I believe it was 100 days of protests, and yeah, most of it turned into a riot. I went down there and I filmed, and I learned that one side, there was a protest. So there's these two parks, one that's in front of the federal building and one that's in front of some Oregon state building. Every night around 6 o'clock, there was a protest in front of the state building. Now, they'd protest for about an hour, and they had speakers, they held signs, and, all this stuff. Typical protests following the law. Well, as they'd filter out, and I watched this happen like 4 different nights, you could see another element coming and gathering in front of the federal building. That's where the riot would happen. So there was 2 different things entirely. It was really weird. I would go over to the protest side, and it was mostly, I'd say, older folks over 40, stuff like that, couples there, maybe grandparents, that type of thing. They had a legitimate gripe, whether you see it that way or not. They had a right to be there, and they did exactly what they're supposed to do. It's just the nightmare that was going on in front of the federal building kind of put a stain on anything that was legit in front of the state building. Movies released on May 26, 1993, Menace to Society. This was a pretty good movie. It's about a kid that's tired of the gang lifestyle and wants to get out. His name's Kane, and a teacher and his girlfriend help him, but then there's some tragedy, and leaving becomes less of an option. Very good movie. It was set in Watts, Los Angeles. I know the whole area that was filmed, not a place I would hang out, but I know that whole area. Growing up in LA County, well, actually, I grew up in the suburbs south of LA. Born on May 26, Stevie Nicks, American singer-songwriter. She's most well known for being part of Fleetwood Mac. Funny story about her. Now, Lindsey Buckingham is a great guitarist and songwriter. Back in the day, that was Stevie Nicks' boyfriend. Well, Fleetwood Mac wanted to have him in the band. They'd seen him at rehearsals or something like that. He was like a session musician at the studio. So one of the guys from Fleetwood Mac, who were big at the time, asked him who he was and said he's going to see if he'd join the band. And the guy at the recording studio said, if you have him, you're going to have to take his girlfriend. And they're all, no, we're just going to take him and watch. We're Fleetwood Mac. We don't need another female singer. The studio engineer guy saw Nick Fleetwood like a month later, and he goes, hey, how'd that work out with Lindsey Buckingham? And Nick Fleetwood said, oh, it's great. I got him and his girlfriend on the band. Died on May 26, 2022, Andy Fletcher, English musician. Andy Fletcher was an English keyboard player and founding member of the electronic band Depeche Mode, who I loved back in the day, still do. In 2020, he and the band were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. At least he got to see that. I'm a diehard Clash fan, about the same time they're big as Depeche Mode. And Joe Strummer, the lead singer and kind of the head guy of the band, found out they were being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but died like 6 months before the ceremony. I always thought that was really sad. At least he knew he was going in. Alright, that's today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to give the video a big thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great day. Be nice to each other.